Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you to our ongoing peer review weekly professional training on trauma-informed and capable care. Today we're going to focus a little bit on EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. We're going to talk a little bit about what EMDR is in the broadest sense and a little bit about why or how we think it works. EMDR was developed by Francine Shapiro about 30 years ago and is probably, if not the most, one of the most intensely researched psychotherapies ever. It was highly controversial, particularly in its early years, because of the rapid changes that were observed in clients who suffered from what appeared to be at the time severe and intractable post-traumatic stress disorder. That research has clearly demonstrated that EMDR psychotherapy works. That is no longer a question, particularly for post-traumatic stress disorder related conditions. We know it works. So the argument is now past. What remains as an academic discussion and a research curiosity is, what is the exact mechanism of action of EMDR psychotherapy? And again, a lot of focus is given to the eye movement effects of what used to be called bilateral stimulation, what is now being called dual attention stimuli, which can include sounds, tapping, or auditory, visual, or other forms of movement to create dual attention stimuli. But before we get into that, I'm going to digress a bit and go back to a little bit about what is EMDR. EMDR is a full psychotherapeutic methodology, an entire psychotherapeutic method that is foundationed on an entirely unique and innovative hypothesis. And that hypothesis is that emotional disturbance is a result of unprocessed or dysfunctionally stored information or memory. Put in kind of a crude way, we could say it's memory indigestion or downright obstruction in some cases, which results in emotional, social, and or neurological disturbance. Disturbance in any area of sensorium, perception, emotion, and experience, resulting in dysregulation. The organism, the central nervous system, is unable to regulate itself as it might otherwise with such memory disturbance and memory lack of integration. So, with this hypothesis, the adaptive information processing model was proffered, and that model says that if we can process this information or get this natural processing working again, the organism should begin to right itself. Should begin to right itself. And what does that look like? What does that look like? So EMDR looks at the brain from the perspective that information may be stored dysfunctionally, as it's described, in a part of the brain. We're not exactly sure. Some people have said it's the non-verbal part of the brain. We're not exactly sure. And that somehow it is blocked from coming into the verbal part of the brain, or the experience is so disturbing that we can't find words for it. Therefore, if we can develop a process where we can begin to bring that information across and allow it to be naturally processed into words, the person should make new meaning out of the experience, and in so doing rewrite their narrative and hopefully have a greater sense of regulation and peace regarding the memory, and hopefully an improvement in their functioning, an adaptive processing, which will create an adaptive functioning improvement. So the idea is that this memory is contained and in some ways moved outside of the person's awareness through the defensive system, what we call the adaptive protective defensive system. Biologically, we're looking at, we believe, the amygdala and the hippocampal system, we believe. We look at the amygdala as kind of the operating defensive system, the autonomic mammalian and reptilian functions of fight, flight, freeze, attachment cry, collapse, and even recovery from a trauma, the attempt to withdraw, lick one's wounds, and recover from trauma. We look at the hippocampal system as the memory storage and the part of the brain that gives memories their value, whether they're pleasurable, painful, dangerous, or safe, and it timestamps them. When did they happen? Was this a bear that we saw in a TV show or in the zoo when we were a kid, or is there a bear in the backyard right now? And a lot of research seems to indicate that when there has been chronic and persistent post-traumatic stress disorder, there is a thinning of hippocampal volume. Recent replicated research, neurological research across Europe, and is being replicated in the United States as well as Europe, seems to indicate that a very few, relatively few EMDR sessions can bring about a significant thickening of hippocampal volume. That is profound, the implications of this. And that's not to say that only EMDR psychotherapy does that. Maybe other psychotherapies do that as well. And there is a large-scale longitudinal study going on in Rome right now that's looking at comparing EMDR psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy to see whether or not this same effect is occurring in both therapies. And if so, under what conditions and under what populations. So back to the idea, EMDR, through the use of dual attention stimuli, or what we used to call bilateral stimulation, facilitates an integration of memory. What does that look like? And how do we think it works? In the beginning, we thought that the eye movements, which we have researched to indicate, there's research to indicate that it's the most effective or powerful means of stimulation of this processing. As compared to all other forms of dual attention stimuli, the eye movement in research and meta-analysis indicates that it's the most effective and potent. Doesn't mean it's the only way to process, but it's the most effective and potent. There may be situations where that's not appropriate based on individuals that can't tolerate it, or there may be even cultural situations where that may not be appropriate. And therefore, other forms of dual attention stimuli may be far more relevant and appropriate to that context. You may find in a treatment situation that a wide range of dual attention stimuli will be varied depending upon what the individual is going through. So it may become, as Dr. Roger Solomon would call it, a dance. And in that dance, there may be a lot of movements and a lot of changes. It can be a very wonderfully graceful and artistic dance. So, in the beginning, we thought that the eye movements themselves must be stimulating possibly REM activity in the brain. We weren't sure, stimulating parts of the brain. We're still not sure. And then we are considering today the idea of dual attention stimuli as having a functional therapeutic benefit. A very, very functional and important therapeutic benefit. If we back up a bit and consider that trauma processing and resolution involves a couple simple things. The first thing it involves is the remembering of the event while remaining present in this current moment in time. Not just intellectually, but experientially. In other words, memory is not processed if we are completely reliving the memory. There's risk of actual re-traumatization. Exposure therapy runs that risk. Memory is also not processed if we're strictly intellectual and we're not even in the experience of the memory and we're just simply talking about it, but we're really not really narratively going there. We're completely intellectually here in the present, and we're not really going to dabble our fingers into it. So the metaphor that's often used, I've heard Jim Knipe use it and others, having one foot in the present and one foot in the past. And if we can dance back and forth with one foot in the present and one foot in the past, and we titrate that through a regular processing of reviewing the memory, coming back to experience it, experiencing the memory, coming back to reviewing it. When we review it, we put it into a narrative, then we go back to dance and experience the memory, and then we come back and put it into a narrative. This titrating dance, done in the right steps at the right speed and in the right relationship, will create an optimum environment for the brain to start to cook this material metaphorically and process the memory. One foot in the present, one foot in the past. We don't want both feet in the past. We're reliving and potentially re-traumatizing. And we don't want both feet in the present, because then we're just intellectualizing and nothing's probably going to happen.